Hey, everybody. It is late November of 2025, and we're doing our employers update. How is everybody?
Pretty good. Ready for Thanksgiving.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Do you guys want to do the sort of 30-second intro to who you are and what you handle at the firm so folks have context about who's answering what? Brian, you're at the top of my screen if you want to go.
Hi, I'm Brian Levy. I take care of the litigation at the firm. So basically, anytime there is an opposing party, it comes to me.
What about you, Amber?
I handle all of the human resources area of the firm.
That's right. And Lindsay, what about you?
I am on the workplace investigation side of the house and also provide executive coaching as well as cultural assessment and any kind of like cultural consultations that our clients need, and also helping those fun crisis situations that come up involving volatile employees, workplace violence potential, those sorts of things.
Sarah.
I'm Sarah Frazier. I handle business formations. Asset protection structures are the funnest for me, and we can talk more about that if anybody needs to explore it. Intellectual property considerations, general contract help, and business law questions, and tax stuff comes to me.
I am Natalie Lynch. I am the owner of the firm and I practice as infrequently as possible because the thing I'm most good at is hiring people who are better than me. And so I do still do an assist and a lift on a handful of things. Investigations used to be my passion and specialty, but I certainly had my fingers in everything. But anymore, I hope that I'm just running around supporting everybody else. All right, so again, it's the end of November, so we are looking towards the holidays and the end of the year. And so that's how we're going to start this talk. And when it's holiday season, there is a lot of commercial activity, and that tends to add a lot of temporary workers to workforces. Kids come home from college and get temporary jobs. I know I'm hiring somebody in the neighborhood to take care of my cats so I can go spend time with my dad. And she's a temporary worker. So Amber, I'm going to start with you, but of course, anybody can jump in. Lindsay, maybe you have thoughts about any of this, but Amber, what do we need to watch out for with temporary workers, especially around the holidays?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a high time for temporary workers. So I think the biggest thing that we need to look out for is classification. And so are they an employee or are they an independent contractor? This is definitely a major enforcement priority for IRS, DOL, state agencies at this time. So
Mm.
just looking at that, one way that you really know if they are going to be of an employee versus an independent contractor are whether they set their own work hours, their own schedule, if they're really involved in your core business, if they work with customers, just really day-to-day operations. And if they're customer facing, that's another big one. So it's really a control test. That's how a lot of people look at it is how much control that they have. If they're integrated. So I think that's mainly the first thing. And then secondary, I would say if they're temporary or seasonal. So I think ultimately best practices that I can say is making sure you have the right classification, a clear job description, and just the right onboarding paperwork, I-9, W-4, those kind of things.
So no shortcuts with temporary workers on the hiring side.
No shortcuts, not even if they agree, not even if they ask, they want to be an independent contractor, no shortcuts.
But what about it's happened before that people are like, what do you mean I'm temporary? What do you mean I'm seasonal? So in some ways it can actually even be more work to hire temporary folks, right?
It It could be. I think if you have a defined period, a defined project, you kind of have the process in place because a lot of times, temporary is going to be for that, but seasonal you can definitely foresee, right? That's going to be reoccurring typically. So if it's tax season, if you're in that business, Christmas time might be for certain businesses. So I think it could be more work depending on the way you look at it, but it also could be really great if you have a good process in place for your company.
All right. So basically we should actually communicate with folks so they know how long they're going to be working for us. Lindsay, you usually have something to say about employee communications. You got anything for us?
Oh, well, actually, my thought process was around kind of the onboarding and offboarding of temporary and seasonal employees, because I obviously think about this from like a cultural perspective. And if you're in the kind of business that routinely hires seasonal employees, you probably have processes and established kind of protocols for how you bring people on temporarily and then offboard them later. But that period of time where your seasonal employees are integrating with your permanent employees can sometimes be disruptive or change the tone and tenor of the culture. And so if you are a newer business or new to hiring seasonally, I think it's really important for employers to be just mindful about how flooding your workforce with new members without thinking about how those members are going to work together, how they're going to collaborate, how they're going to ultimately get the job done for you at the end of the day, and how those personalities can sometimes clash. You might end up with more of a headache than you really bargained for. So it's just something to be mindful of if your organization is not used to hiring on a seasonal or temporary basis.
And then, Amber, anybody really, feel free to jump in. I'm going to transition a little bit. So sometimes when we have seasonal workers, I happen to do it around holidays, and we tend to have a lot of parties around the holidays. And sometimes people are sort of newly inserted into a culture, but holiday parties also tend to have alcohol. They tend to be off-site. Just sort of generally in society, the holidays are a really stressful time in our personal lives, and we definitely bring those things to the office. And then if we're bringing it to a party and a party with alcohol, things tend to happen. So, Lindsay, what do you think about when you work with companies around holiday and holiday parties and general holiday naughtiness?
I'm of two minds on this, because the like sort of extroverted social side of me is like, yeah, we got to celebrate. We had a great year. We need to recognize and take some time away from what sometimes might be an otherwise stressful work environment. And so that side of me is all gung ho for holiday parties, but they're so incredibly fraught. And I think if employers don't do the pre-planning necessary to mitigate the risk that comes from them, that's when someone like me or Natalie on the investigation side of the house will have to help you deal with the fallout. And so to your point, Natalie, a lot of times alcohol is involved. And so you want to think about what the impact of that is in terms of lowering folks' inhibitions and creating risk in terms of the behaviors that people might engage in as a result of that. So getting ahead of those kinds of problems by doing things like limiting, maybe it's a 2-drink limit. Maybe you close the bar early before the event ends. Maybe you really coach up your leaders to model good behavior around alcohol and their engagement with alcohol. So there's a lot of things to be done in advance. Not that you shouldn't have it, but kind of setting up the guardrails around it appropriately, because risk for things like sexual harassment spikes, manager misconduct creates a particular avenue of liability for employers. The risk of photo and video making its way to social media and other platforms can expose employers. So there's just a lot of considerations here, and a lot of, like, as I mentioned, fraught risk around it.
Yeah, I mean, how many January investigations do we do into December parties?
Yeah. Or, I mean, an analogous situation are like summer trade shows, same types of environments
Exactly. Yeah,
created. We see seasons of this kind of behavior
we
often, or
do.
these complaints.
Yeah.
And so the other thing kind of related to the alcohol piece of this, that is really important, is thinking ahead for how, again, what those guardrails are. So thinking about managing transportation and providing transportation support in advance, and setting those things up is really important.
Yeah, the
People.
app shares have made that easy too. I mean, the major app shares have you can have a sponsor for a party and a code, and it'll take you home. But a lot of hotels have that now too. So if you're doing things in hotels, and bars have that too. And I've actually been to a few cities that have a city-wide program. So yeah, that's a really good point on the transportation piece, Lindsay. Amber, any war stories or any other thoughts beyond what Lindsay said that kind of like just model goodness and model moderation and think about moderation before you get your first drink in the evening?
Nothing really to add. I think guardrails, I liked that word. I think those are very important, and just to really monitor and try to anticipate the things that, maybe could happen at those parties when people are having a good time.
Hey, Brian, does anybody feel sorry for an employer if the behavior happened at a holiday party?
Um, I, I think there's a pretty easy way to think about that, and it's if it's a company sponsored event, it is the same as being in the office at work. As an employer, if you are sponsoring a holiday party, you are responsible for your employees' safety.
Yeah.
And almost every Monday in December, we're getting a call from a client who had something happen over the weekend at their holiday party. The alcohol, it can exacerbate problems that have been festering below the surface for quite some time. Like maybe a female employee didn't report a couple creepy comments that a male employee made, but he has a couple of drinks at the holiday party, and so he thinks that was some sort of consent. Wrongly, he thinks that, but it's impossible to get inside of these people's heads. So I mean, I've heard tickets. So is a way to monitoring drinks. Certainly we recommend serving food anytime you're serving alcohol. Um, and I think those are the major things that have popped up.
So yeah, I'll just share. I had a personal situation that was not in any way related to the firm I was attending as a guest. But there was a situation where the entire workforce was just sort of like, oh, that's Tim, he's like this anyway, but then when he drinks, everybody knows he's gonna, touch all the women. His wife knows he's gonna touch all his coworkers. Like and Tim was falling down and it was just super uncomfortable. But from my position as an attorney who was not representing that employer as a client, again, I was just there as a guest. I was just like, why are all of these people tolerating? Who's enforcing the reporting rules? Because uh this is one of those times again, like Brian said, if you're at a work sponsored event, you're at work. And so all of the things that the Ambers and the Lindsays do for you guys to get your handbooks in place, like this is when that mandatory reporting is still mandatory. It this is when the buck stops. Like you still have to report things. And if you're not if if you're a manager and you've gone to a holiday party and you are kind of aware that there's some naughtiness and you're not receiving any complaints, like things aren't working with your handbook.
You you could potentially be on the hook for liability if you're a manager or a supervisor that doesn't
Yeah.
take action if you see someone being sexually harassed.
Yeah, Brian, I know where you're going with that. You want to explain that, especially for our Texas viewers?
Yes, I'll just very quickly in September of 21, Texas changed the law regarding sexual harassment complaints. And the way they did it is by changing the definition of employer. Generally, for discrimination, harassment, retaliation complaints, an employer is defined as having 15 or more employees. And the change was to define employers regarding sexual harassment as one or more employees, and they included individual supervisor and manager liability. So, um,
So say that for
that
real
that
people.
yeah, like I mean, that can really have an impact if you have frontline managers knowing that they can be sued, they tend to behave more in line with what the company would want because they're actually potentially liable for these things.
But
So
personally
training,
liable.
yeah,
So,
they're actually personally liable. Like they can come and take your money out of your bank account. They're probably not going to take your house if it's your homestead, but and the real problem for employers with that is national employers are now not being able to remove cases to federal court because they have a resident defendant in that supervisor and manager. So we're seeing supervisors and managers get sued a lot more often than they actually would be just to get the jurisdictional requirements to keep it in state court, which is generally more favorable to employees.
I'm going to re-say that, Brian. Uh,
Please.
so if you're an employer or you are in any way in any kind of leadership, even if you have very little authority, but you are a leader, and there is sexual harassment at your workforce in Texas, including at holiday parties, they can come take your stuff. Does not matter if you have a corporation, it doesn't matter if you have an LLC. They can come personally take your cars, your money, your kid, the car that your kid drives. You are personally culpable for sexual harassment in the workplace if you have any supervisory authority in the state of Texas. It makes Texas the most progressive state in the nation, which is just always really fun for me to say. Um, all right. Anything else about that? I'm gonna move to kind of red flags. Brian, what are the red flags? What are the triggers when somebody knows they should call a Brian, a litigator, a person who's not preventative like some of us on this call, but a person who does the cleanup job?
Yeah, I think you should be looking out for anytime you have an employee that's disgruntled because what happens more likely than not, employees generally aren't experts in the law. So what generally happens is they are dissatisfied. And so then they start doing some research on the internet and looking into things. And that's how they arrive at a claim. It's not because they're actually feeling specific, oh, I've been discriminated against because of my race. It ends up being framed like that in the end, but it started most likely with I don't think that's fair. And if you would have been able to have better oversight of those smaller decisions and take the temperature, Lindsay's great at doing that for organizations. But to take the temperature of your employees and that can help prevent a lot of having to talk to me. The other things that are really helpful is when you have job descriptions and policies and procedures that you enforce routinely. So it's much easier for a manager to say to an employee, like, here's your performance review. We talked about these things 6 months ago, and none of them improved. So we're going to be noting that in your review, and it's all part of a performance, I guess a positive performance evaluation process rather than waiting until you want to fire an employee and then you start writing people up. Juries know the difference, and it just doesn't seem as credible when you try and work backwards from the end. Is that what
Well, I
you're
was
asking
wondering
for?
about triggers. Like, I'm at a holiday party. I saw naughtiness. Should I wait and see if somebody complains, or should I just call you and be like, Brian, I saw touching. What do I need to do to get ahead of this?
Oh, absolutely. The sooner you call us, the better. It is so frequent that we're getting a call after a decision has been made and they're want a client or potential client is wanting us to like co-sign or like give them a good job on their decision. And if that's what you're using a law firm for, that's one thing. But we can actually add value if you call us earlier. We can help you create the proper documentation. We can help you figure out whether you have a problem or not. And it is much cheaper to do these things on the front end than to repair your organization, let alone fighting the allegations in the EEOC or Department of Labor or a court, wherever it is. That's a whole nother set of costs, but like there's also costs on your organization and to the culture, which I'm sure some of the other panelists might be able to talk more about better than I can. But I think the point from my where I sit is we can be really helpful in minimizing impact or even avoiding a serious situation if we get enough notice. And that's kind of like the preventative work, policies and procedures, job descriptions are an very important step, but there's also like this active steering of the ship. So checking in and discussing how those policies are being enforced. And it's a very minimal expense to have a call that we're talking about. Could this be a problem? And how can I react when I see it? Is way less expensive than this happened. Now we have this problem. What do we do? So I think that's kind of
Yeah.
the
I think what I hear you saying is, if we find out about it before somebody complains, we can head it off there. If we don't find out about it until somebody complains, we can only address it there. If we don't find out about it until somebody's filed, we can only start at that level. And so if we always encourage our clients to acknowledge to us, like, we don't care. This is the work we do. We know things happen. There's no shame that you had a naughty employee. Like, let us know because we can't respond until we know. But it always has to start at the level of our involvement for us. Um, all right. Anybody else have any comments about triggers people could watch for when to call O'Brien, when to reach out to the firm for help?
there was one thing that I wanted to comment on that I didn't hear that I think we'd be remiss for not mentioning is religious accommodation requests.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, so some employees don't drink because of religious reasons. Other employees can't go drive a car, for instance, on a Friday night or Saturday before sunset. And so requiring these employees to show up at an outside of working hours event may pose specific challenges on some subsets of employees rather than others. So I guess the takeaway is to be overly cautious and to not assume anything and maybe ask for more information so you can really determine if someone has a valid religious reason for not being at the holiday event.
That brings up another thing actually that's been on my mind about how these events are set up in the first place. Because a lot of times I think what we see is that these events are not technically required. They're kind of advertised as optional for employees, but the way employees may perceive optional might not actually align with the true definition of optional, in the sense that they may feel some sense of pressure or obligation just from like a reputational perspective. So regardless if they need or require a religious accommodation or an accommodation of any sort around these things, it may just be from a sort of a power dynamics perspective that there's like this sense of pressure that they have to attend, even if it's advertised as optional, out of fear that if they don't go, they'll be perceived a certain way, less engaged or not interested in advancement or, those sorts of things. And so this is where your existing culture is really going to come into play as it relates to employees' decisions around whether or not they even attend these kinds of events. And not just culturally, but like relationships with their managers and supervisors, and the extent to which they feel like they can decline to attend the event, the extent to which they can, if we're talking about a sexual harassment type of situation, the extent to which they feel like they can remove themselves from an uncomfortable situation or say no or assert themselves in those situations. And so I don't want to leave the impression either that alcohol is the only thing that makes holiday events fraught because it really is all of these factors that come into play as well.
The optional thing comes up in, I mean, so many investigations. It's all the
Yeah.
sub clues. But Brian brought up the religious accommodation issue. Amber, what's your like first level response guidance that you give to employers when somebody says, "Well, I can't do that because."
I think we start, looking at a conversation with them to figure out how we can accommodate them. I think always trying to remember it's really easy during the holidays to say, oh, it's a Christmas party. And remember inclusivity during this time, making sure that the languages are neutral, things like that. And if someone does bring it up to you, and sometimes things aren't purposeful, if you schedule something during a religious time period, or you're just not thinking, or maybe you don't know, what you don't know, you don't know. But then how you handle it is really important. So having that interactive conversation with them, seeing if we can somehow accommodate them, as long as it doesn't have an undue hardship. You never want to question their religion if it's real. You just really want to try to be as accommodating as possible with them. And then just in the back of your mind, always try to remember, that inclusivity part of that during the holidays, and really during, the whole year, but especially during the holiday time period.
Hey, Sarah, I didn't forget you. The other fun thing that happens in the holidays is bonuses. What do
Yeah.
you have to say? And then I'll put it to Amber for the sort of HR perspective on it. But what say you about holiday bonuses?
I'd say the recurring issue I commonly see with these are that the employers don't communicate what exactly it's for. And this can create unreasonable expectations for like how big the bonus is, things like that. And what Lindsay could probably talk on later too is that it's not a fix for any cultural problems you had during the year. So sometimes people think that by giving a large amount of money, they're like, hey, this might save us on lawsuits. It's going to keep the people happy. It can be a band-aid for a couple years, but it's not a good like fix. Um, but as for classification of what the money is you're giving them, make sure you document if it's discretionary or non-discretionary. So discretionary, that's like, hey, this is truly like a last minute thank you amount. You won't have to include it in your overtime calculations. Then you have non-discretionary, and this is where you see like a performance-based end of year bonus, but it's labeled as a holiday bonus. And often you need to include those in your overtime calculations. It's good to coordinate with your CPA so they can help you strategize for what's the best for your tax situation for that particular year. It's hard to give you a blanket like, hey, this is the best way to give your employees bonuses to help them be happy and best for your tax situation. Talk to a CPA or a tax attorney. Tax attorneys can have some more creative, and by creative, I still mean completely legal, but they'll have more creative ideas because tax attorneys have a way of reading the tax code and being like, well, I don't see anywhere in here where it says you can't do something. And CPAs, they very much like the structure. And they're like, I want it explicitly stated, hey, this works. So sometimes the rigidity can frustrate people, but definitely play around with where you seek your tax guidance. And then make sure you properly document the intent. That's also important if you were to be audited. And so just keep that in your tax files. And it's pretty simple to do. If it's, yeah, pretty simple to put in your records. And then also avoid accidental precedent, because sometimes if you do the same type of bonus structure 2 years in a row, employees are going to come to expect it. And then as soon as you don't do something at the end of the year, whether it's like, hey, you had a financially hard year, you can't afford bonuses, things like that, people get really mad because they get a holiday bonus entitlement. And that can just create a lot of issues. So communication's key. Don't try to fix your cultural issues with it and document.
Is anybody else thinking about that classic scene in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation?
Yeah.
That's actually what I was thinking of from that.
It's funny because it's real, right?
Yeah.
That like expectation. And that's not to say you shouldn't have like a standard process, because we're all big fans of standard process around here. But like Sarah, the point you make about communication is just like necessary, or you are going to end up with claims on the backside of this.
Yeah, because if they think they're entitled to this amount of money, they might be depending on that for like Christmas presents for their kids, and it can get really emotional really fast, and
Yeah.
you don't want to deal with that.
So I went to the tax lady and I got a largely human response. But Amber, you got anything to add to the end of year holiday bonus issue on the HR side?
I
I
want
think
to
it's
bring up gift
notable
cards.
that I think it's notable you were asking the tax lady and the human stuff was so forward. So,
I think gift cards, I just wanted to bring up gift cards. I
Oh,
think even, if you give someone a $20 Target gift card, it doesn't really matter. It's always taxable. They always need to be run through payroll. So if I go hand Natalie a $20 Amazon gift card right now, I need to shoot that over to payroll and put that on there as well. I think that's one that I see a lot. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is any holiday bonuses, it's normally just safer to be discretionary. If you're thinking holiday, end of the year, don't put it in your handbook. Don't promise it, like she said. But um, I think I just wanted to add on the gift card part.
all
That's it.
right. So my tax lady is giving human advice. My human lady's giving tax advice.
yeah. Well, I would
Dogs are
say
loving
just a
cats,
pause
cats are
on the
loving dogs.
discretionary versus non-discretionary. Discretionary is easier, but there is some creative tax structure you can do with the non-discretionary structures, particularly for executives. So, for example, a couple of the executive packages that I reviewed, it had that in there. And there are certain ways you can phrase those non-discretionary bonuses so that you don't award them with that bonus unless revenues at a certain point. Sometimes you get super complicated with like phantom stock shares or things like that, but there's a way where it's not like a guarantee you might be screwed even if you don't make money. Like you can put those safeguards in place, and really you'll just see that with sophisticated like executive contracts, not so much like your standard entry level employees. So don't be scared of those. There is safeguards. You just have to properly document it and talk to your tax people because they get very frustrated when you tell them after the fact and you have to do some interesting mop up.
All right, let's transition a little from holidays to actually end of the calendar and tax year. Sarah, ERC, the Employee Retention Credit, is on everybody's mouth lately. What should we be thinking about?
So if you took the credit, you really need to review it now before the IRS cracks down on it and starts the conversation with you. It's really easy to get ahead of the game with the IRS right now just because the government reopened. Everyone's still drowning. So it's really easy to get the first word in or just often the first advice I'll give is just start having memorandums in your file so you have a really quick response as soon as the IRS gets to you. Because I found if you can promptly respond to audit notices and like kind of pick apart or at least put reasonable doubt in their mind for like, hey, maybe I'm misinterpreting this, it's really easy to lead the conversation. Also, with the gutting of the IRS, you're getting what's the right word for it? Interestingly trained people, in that a lot of times they let the older people go that were experienced, knew what they were doing. And then they had all these new people that weren't properly trained because they didn't have the ones that were experienced there to help them and guide them. So don't be afraid to just like question their interpretation of things. There's still a way you can be nice about it. Some of the IRS agents will get spicy whenever they get confused, but that's okay. That's why you hire people like me to help, lead that conversation. Common red flags that you might have already done. So you probably need help is if you claim the ERC, but you didn't have a documented like government shutdown order that you linked it to. You used like gross receipts decline, but you didn't do any of the calculations. So sometimes people are like, well, I did it in my head, or I just didn't show the math. Always show the math. If you relied on like supply chain disruption, but you didn't document how actually your supply chain was disrupted. Lots of people think like things with the ERC, they're like, hey, if there's some kind of event going like national crisis going on, I automatically get it. You still need to document how it's related to you. So document, and communicate with your tax people so they can help you. And so they have a good understanding of what's going on before the IRS calls you. Yeah.
All right, so speaking of government calls, Amber, what about overtime compliance? End of year, we're getting all our projects we didn't do done. We've been interrupted by holiday parties. We got some overtime. What do we need to be looking at to keep that all compliant?
I think overall, just making sure we're, within the guidelines, people are getting paid depending on if they are exempt salary or non-exempt hourly. They're getting paid anytime they're working, especially for those non-exempt folks, if they're, coming and helping out with things, that's work related, making sure they're paid for that. And in relation to the overtime, making sure that, they're just overall paid. The bonuses, I think, is a big one to come back to that. The non-discretionary, putting that into that regular rate. I don't know. I don't have a whole lot to add on that, I guess.
Just do it right. Don't make assumptions. Don't get creative. Do it right. Call us if you need help. It's real rigid. This is not an area of flexibility. Speaking of areas of flexibility, Sarah, what about this FinCEN and the business owner filings that people feel strongly they either do or do not want to do?
So
How
this,
do we think about that today?
yeah. So this has been the soap opera of the year, or soap opera since it passed. There's been a lot of mixed guidance. And the mixed guidance is that it's less that people are misunderstanding it and more so that the minds of people keep getting like of FinCEN itself keeps changing. The government keeps changing on what to do. So there was a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of good write-ups on this back and forth if you want to immerse yourself in the soap opera. But in the end, it ended up being so politically tied on what to do that a lot of people thought that they could just straight up refuse to file their BOIR even if they needed to they didn't like because they didn't like Trump. They're like, or they like Trump, so they don't need to file it. And they didn't like Biden. And that was like the sole reason. In which case you'd have to do like a risk assessment and be like, hey, yeah, it was just I got a lot of colorful commentary when this was going on about people. They're like, Trump's just going to overturn this. I don't need a file. But I will say that it's been severely limited now. So for most people that for domestically owned U.S. companies, this is not an issue anymore. They've changed the focus of the BOIR reporting, which all that is you have to upload like your driver's license or current information about the ultimate beneficial owners of the company. The target initially was foreign-owned company, like shell companies existing for the sole purpose of tax evasion, things like that. So now it's specifically targeted to foreign owners. And I found most of the foreign-owned companies, like they don't mind. They're like, hey, I just want a US company. I'm okay with showing my hand. And then the people that honestly have issues with filing it, that it still applies to, like, they're probably people you don't want to do business with anyway, because you're like, what is this business for? And they can't tell you. So long story short, this was a big soap opera, but in the end, domestic workers, you are largely exempt. Still have someone check to make sure that you don't need to do a BOIR. But yeah. And please don't make it this political for whether or not you comply, because often people don't want to pay for their political opinion, and then you're going to get mad at your tax professionals or your other professionals that help you with this, and it's not their fault. Yeah.
Yeah, when your attorney is saying, I'm having to document that you're declining to follow my advice, you should really feel strongly about your convictions before you move forward in that path. All right, so that's a lot of tax stuff at end of year compliance. But Lindsay, what about other things? We tend to do our annual reviews around then, things like that.
That's what's on my mind. Yeah, a lot of folks, a lot of our clients and a lot of organizations have either a end of year, in review that's annual, or sometimes it's biannual, but this is the time of year that a lot of these activities are taking place. And where organizations can get in trouble on these processes is, for example, having applying an inconsistent process in any way, or documenting your process and feedback inconsistently, or failing to document or failing to follow your ordinary process. I think what end of year timeframe does to a lot of organizations is, the folks involved are looking toward the holidays. Sometimes it's a more relaxed time of year that folks are taking vacations and looking forward to time off. And as a result, maybe looking for shortcuts in process and documentation. And that's where some of those inconsistencies can crop up. Or on the shortcut side of it, a lot of times managers who are responsible for conducting these reviews can fall into habits like recency bias, for example, in which the most recent, I don't know, 60 or 90 days of performance is what sort of colors the overall evaluation. And, you know, if you have an underperforming employee, sometimes that leads you to undervaluing the contributions they've made throughout the review period, or the opposite can happen. You know, maybe that person has really rocked the last 30 or 60 days or 90 days, and that then ends up in overly favorable evaluations, which they're not going to question, but may end up, if it's tied to merit increases or any kind of compensation, that can lead others to perceive an unfairness in the process. And so, you know, you don't want to give a pass to an employee who had issues that should be reflected on their annual review, but that aren't because of some recency bias that's at play there. Other times, you know, managers like all of us and leaders like all of us can be kind of conflict avoidant, either perpetually or particularly this time of year. And so that can lead to inflations that aren't fair. And again, it comes down to kind of perceptions, and that's where complaints will give rise.
All right, I'm gonna severely shift the topic unless somebody else has any other end of year thoughts. All right, let's talk about AI like everybody else. But let's talk about it at the end and work our ways backwards. So I'm gonna start with you, Brian, because I haven't heard from you in a while. We've had some clients do some AI legaling lately. You want to talk to us about what clients should be thoughtful of when they're working with a lawyer and when they should and shouldn't rely on AI to be their lawyer or be their paralegal?
Sure. And I think this has happened. I've seen it come up a lot with very intelligent and independent business owners or clients, people that are used to finding their own answers. The problem with AI and generally AI, not any specific platform, it's an echo chamber. And so I see a client coming to me and they've ran their scenarios through AI and they have like a whole plan. One that comes to mind is like a common scenario, a client coming in and like we send a demand letter or a cease and desist letter saying, you've taken our IP, you work for a competitor, we want you to not share our IP and potentially stop working for that competitor and pay us X amount of dollars. Um, then we get a response back that has some additional facts and information. To their client then is taking that letter from opposing counsel and coming to us with their own idea of how to respond to the case. And I guess, for instance, my recommendation is often let's send a responsive letter. And then we'll have the client who's talked to AI saying, well, we need to file a lawsuit in Texas so we can have the venue that we choose, and they'll be defending a lawsuit out of state, not in California. And I don't want to go to California. And so they've gone down this like extensive analysis and they formulated their plan. I can't tell you, it seems they're coming in having spent hours and hours researching and formulating this plan, and they just didn't get the very basics of personal jurisdiction. And so we can't sue an employee in California, a California resident employee that never came to Texas, didn't have any business in Texas. So that's a first year law school type scenario. But if you're not asking Chat GP the right questions, you're not going to get the full picture. So complex legal problems don't they most of the time don't have a quick, easy answer. And AI is really good at giving you a quick, easy answer. So some of the nuance gets lost.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's generally the overview that I see.
I'm going to
Um,
interrupt you though. So one of the things I hear you highlighting is that you still need your law degree to ask the right prompt because everything with AI is about the prompt and we're still learning the prompts. And if you don't have the law degree to ask the right prompt, you're not going to get the right information. But the other thing I heard in the scenario that you put in is somebody put their IP up in AI to start talking about how they can go after somebody for stealing their AI, but they put all their information out in the public, and so now it's not protectable anyway. Um, and
yes.
we've run into that. I know we've had that issue come up. Like you put your stuff in the public domain when you tried to save on lawyer fees, and now you don't have anything to protect anymore.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about theft of IP. If you've put that IP into one of these LLMs, it's no longer your protected trade secrets because you shared it with the universe. So asking a court to tell an employee that they can't use that information when you've given it away for free to the universe, it just doesn't fly.
Yeah.
Um, so the caution on ChatGPT kind of scenarios, it kind of overlaps with another issue of getting legal help in advance of when you need it. Um, don't take legal advice from ChatGPT, make a decision, and then come to us afterwards to tell us that you did a great job and that you don't really need us. It costs a lot more when you do that.
Yeah, and it's not like we're anti-AI over here. Before we started the recording, we were all batting around which platform is best for which outcome, not client-facing stuff because we can't put your data out in the public, but we use AI all the time. Like anybody who Googles uses AI. But I mean, we're not anti-AI, but Brian, we also had that client that was saying, I don't understand why I had to pay a normal bill because I was acting as the paralegal with my AI. And I just kept thinking that old mechanic sign that said like $50 to fix your car, $100 if you watch, $500 if you try to help. Like it just ended up costing this client so much more money because he insisted that he was going to sit in the role of paralegal. And like, that's a credentialed position. That is a position. Like, sir, you had no business, right, sending those prompts. AI is a great thought engagement partner. It is, but it is a partner, not a leader. All right, Lindsay, and Amber too. What are we seeing employees be naughty about with AI?
No surprise, I have a bit of a different lens on the use of AI than Brian does, but both are important and worth discussion. And I think about it from an employee use perspective, and some of the issues are related to the kinds of things Brian talked about. But one of the biggest areas where employees can get you in trouble is by feeding sensitive, confidential, or otherwise protected information into an unprotected platform, ChatGPT or anything else, without having specific guardrails around that. I'm going to use that word again because that's really what it's all about. I think another risk, is kind of the first famous example we saw of actually attorneys using AI, and which gave it case law that didn't exist. So one of the major risks of using AI for consequential matters is using its output without independently verifying that it's correct and accurate, will, especially in high risk occupations, can really get you in trouble. And we saw that have seen that happen even in the earliest days of AI use. Another area where employees might give you some trouble is in times in which they pass off their AI work as original. And that can be problematic for employers. And Amber might have more to say about this, but using AI to make people decisions, Natalie, you framed it up like absolutely on point. Like AI is an incredible thought partner. It's not the thought leader, and you should not be relying on it to make employee and employment related decisions as it relates to discipline, termination, how you're going to handle a complaint, how you're going to evaluate their performance, how you're going to train them. AI is a great partner, but not the leader, and you're going to get yourself in a lot of hot water if you use it to make decisions for you. And so in terms of like the mitigation piece of it, policy is king, and make sure that it's communicated effectively throughout your organization so that employers know what those guardrails are. And within that policy, establishing some clear procedures for the protection of confidential and sensitive information.
Yeah, collaborating with your IT department to permit what website, or a lot of organizations are actually having their own like AI model that they're using so they can protect it. That's for bigger corporations, but smaller corporations they don't have that luxury.
All right. Lindsay, the thing I thought you were going to say is the number of AI employee-driven complaints written by AI. Like, here's all my emails. What do I tell HR? That's what I kind of thought you were going to say. We see that
It
now.
definitely has happened. And so, I mean, the strategy is just to ask them about it and to verify if they use, I'm not going to oppose the use of AI for that purpose necessarily, but we do have to make sure that they haven't done that thing where they didn't verify its accuracy before they submit it, right? So just having a very explicit conversation. I think humans are not perfect at detecting the use of AI or AI generated content, but I think we're getting increasingly better at being able to spot it. And so anytime you have a suspicion that AI may have assisted in the filing of a complaint or the crafting of a complaint, just having a very explicit conversation to ensure that what is in that complaint is accurate from the complainer's perspective.
Because one of the things we have played with on the investigation side, right? And this echoes one of Brian's earlier points about the echo chamber. If I have a complaining party and they've provided me with 50 emails about how their manager is awful, and I put all the documents that exist into an analysis tool, and it's 50 emails from a complaining party and one email from the accused, and I say, was this person mistreated? It's going to say, heck yeah, look, there's like 50 times more documentation about the mistreatment. And so it's a bit of an echo chamber. But when it starts coming around and saying like you were wrongfully terminated and just like using terms that don't apply in the state that the people are in, or terms that are like European employment concepts, like we know what that is. All right, so Amber, employees are using it. How can we make sure that it's happening? Because, right, we might have a policy that says don't put company stuff in AI. And if I get an employee complaint that is clearly AI driven, I know I have a policy violation, but how do I even come to have an AI policy, and what should that look like?
I think that's extremely important with how much people are using it, like that was mentioned. I think that having things like what they use, I think a lot of people are like, oh, AI is changing. We don't want to put something in the handbook that's too specific. We don't want to put something too long. We don't want to be, IT say that a lot. However, there is some value to putting what tools they can actually use, what they can't use. The data, like we mentioned, definitely confidential information. I think vendors, also managers' responsibilities for oversight. So if you're a manager, you might what do you need to know, and training. I think training's big. Some people don't know what they don't know, and so they don't know maybe the information's going in a black box and everyone can access it. So I think training's really important. The policy is extremely important. And the other thing to keep in mind is a lot of states, if you're a multi-state employer, have notice and consent requirements. So that starts with recruiting all the way through employment. But if someone's using it and they shouldn't be using it, I think you definitely have to have a transparent conversation with them and let them know the policy and, handle it from there and document that you spoke to them about that, and set expectations.
All right, we are 3 minutes from perfect timing. What else is on anybody's mind at this time of year as we go into Thanksgiving, as we know Christmas is around the corner, as we go and end of year wrap up of projects and tax filings and all the stuff? What else is on anybody's mind? Anybody have any fun war stories to tell? All right, then I guess we'll end the recording. Well, thanks, you guys.
Good chat.